I am 91 years old, and I have never needed glasses in my life. Not reading glasses, not contact lenses, not laser surgery. Never needed any of it. And today, with almost a century of life behind me, I can read the newspaper in the morning, see the faces of my great-grandchildren clearly, and notice details that people 40 years younger than me can no longer see. When I tell someone this for the first time, the reaction is always the same: total disbelief. Because what most people believe is that vision loss is inevitable, that it is only a matter of time, that at some point the body will give in. But what I discovered over decades is that the story everyone gets told is incomplete. And today I'm going to show you what nobody is talking about. Before we go on, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this video from? Could be a small town, could be a big city, could be from outside the US entirely. I want to know where the people here are coming from because it helps me understand who I am actually helping. There is something that happens to the visual system during sleep that practically no health professional ever mentions in appointments. The eye does not rest while you sleep, it works. During the deepest phases of sleep, the body carries out a process of cellular restoration throughout every tissue, and the ocular tissues are an active part of that. The cornea, for example, has no blood vessels, so it depends on a specific nutrient absorption process that happens far more efficiently when the body's at rest. The lens, which is the structure responsible for focusing, also goes through a protein renewal process during the night. The problem is that this process only works properly when the body has the right compounds available. When the right nutrient is missing at the right moment, the ocular tissue regenerates incompletely. Night after night, year after year, this accumulates a deficit that most people only notice when they have already been wearing glasses for years. The first food that has been part of my health routine for decades is the carrot, but not in the way you are thinking. Almost everyone has heard that carrots are good for vision. But what nobody properly explains is why this happens at the cellular level, and why the form and timing of consumption make an enormous difference in results. The carrot is one of the most beta-carotene-dense foods on the planet. The body converts this compound into vitamin A, which is the base nutrient for producing rhodopsin, a light-sensitive protein that lines the photoreceptors inside the retina. These photoreceptors are the cells responsible for capturing light in low-light conditions, and they are the first to deteriorate when there is a vitamin A deficiency in the body. What very few people talk about is that beta-carotene is a fat-soluble compound, which means it needs fat to be absorbed efficiently by the body. Consuming carrots without any source of healthy fat results in absorption far below its potential. This explains why so many people who consume carrots regularly still do not get the full benefits for the visual system. Another point that rarely comes up: beta-carotene also functions as an antioxidant that protects ocular tissue against the oxidative stress caused by light exposure throughout the day. In other words, the carrot does not just help you see better, it actively protects the retinal cells from accumulated wear. The second food is going to surprise a lot of people: the egg yolk. For years, the yolk was demonized because of cholesterol. But from the standpoint of ocular health, the egg yolk is one of the most complete foods that exist. And the reason lies in two specific compounds: lutein and zeaxanthin. These two compounds deposit directly into the macula, which is the central region of the retina, responsible for detailed vision and color perception. The macula is precisely the area that degenerates over time in people with advanced vision problems, and lutein and zeaxanthin act as a natural protective filter against high-energy light wavelengths, especially blue light, which is everywhere today because of screens. What makes the egg yolk superior to other foods that also contain these compounds is bioavailability. The body absorbs lutein and zeaxanthin from egg yolk significantly more efficiently than from plant sources. There is a physiological reason for this. The lipid structure of the yolk facilitates the transport of these compounds through the intestinal wall. And here is the detail that practically nobody mentions: regular consumption of these compounds does not just protect the existing macula. Long-term research shows that macular density in people with consistent lutein and zeaxanthin intake remains far more stable over the years than in people with low consumption. In other words, it is not just protection, it is active maintenance of visual capacity. Tell me in the comments, did you already know that the egg yolk had this specific role in eye health? I am genuinely curious to know what the people here already knew before arriving at this video. The third food is one I consider among the most underestimated when the subject is ocular health: wild salmon. Most people associate fish consumption with cardiovascular health, but the relationship between omega-3 fatty acids and eye health is far deeper than what gets discussed out there. The human retina has one of the highest concentrations of DHA fatty acids of any tissue in the body. DHA is a long-chain omega-3 that forms part of the structural membrane of retinal cells. When DHA levels in the body are low, the cell membranes of the retina become less fluid, less functional, and the transmission of signals between photoreceptors and the optic nerve becomes less efficient. But what gets talked about least is the role of omega-3 in the health of the tear film. The surface of the eye is covered by a thin layer of tears that has three components: water, mucus, and fat. When the lipid layer of that film is compromised, the tear evaporates too quickly, the eye dries out, and this creates chronic low-grade inflammation on the ocular surface. That inflammation, accumulated over years, contributes to the deterioration of ocular tissue in a way that does not show up immediately in exams, but causes progressive damage. The DHA found in wild salmon, in particular, supports the production of the lipid component of the tear film by the meibomian glands. This means that regular consumption of wild salmon contributes to a more stable, less inflamed ocular surface that is more resistant to daily wear. And there is more. Wild salmon also contains astaxanthin, a carotenoid with antioxidant capacity that, according to recent research, has a particular affinity with ocular tissue. Unlike other antioxidants, astaxanthin can cross the blood-retinal barrier, which is a protective barrier between the blood and the retina, and act directly inside the tissue that needs protection. The fourth food is the blueberry. There is a documented phenomenon going back to World War II about pilots of the British Royal Air Force who consumed blueberry jam before night missions and reported significant improvement in night vision. For decades, that account circulated as anecdote without a clear scientific explanation. But today, the research on this food for ocular health is far more advanced. The blueberry is one of the most concentrated sources of anthocyanins on the planet. Anthocyanins are pigments with antioxidant activity that have affinity with vascular tissues. In the ocular context, this is relevant because the eye has one of the finest and most sensitive vascular networks in the body. The capillaries that supply the retina have a minimal diameter, and any compromise to their structural integrity directly affects the oxygenation and nutrition of retinal tissue. The anthocyanins of the blueberry act specifically on these microvessels, reducing excessive capillary permeability, protecting vessel walls against oxidative damage, and supporting the production of collagen that keeps these tissues intact. But the aspect that gets discussed least is the impact of anthocyanins on the speed of rhodopsin regeneration, that light-sensitive protein I mentioned earlier. Studies show that blueberry anthocyanins accelerate the rhodopsin regeneration cycle after exposure to intense light. In practice, this means the eye adapts faster to changes in luminosity, and recovery after prolonged exposure to bright light is more efficient. For anyone who spends many hours looking at screens, whether a computer or a phone, this mechanism is especially important. The visual stress generated by high-energy light from screens is absorbed with more resilience when the rhodopsin regeneration system is functioning well. The fifth food is kale, specifically the darkest leaves. Kale is one of the most concentrated plant sources of lutein that exist. But what sets kale apart from other lutein-rich foods is its complete compound profile, especially its vitamin K, folic acid, and glucosinolates, which have an indirect but important relationship with ocular health. Vitamin K has a role that practically never comes up in discussions about vision. It is involved in regulating proteins that control calcium deposition in soft tissues. Recent research has begun investigating the relationship between calcium metabolism and the formation of drusen, which are deposits that accumulate beneath the retina and are associated with age-related macular degeneration. The hypothesis is still being studied, but there is already preliminary data showing that people with lower vitamin K intake have greater drusen accumulation over time. The glucosinolates in kale, in turn, are compounds the body converts into isothiocyanates, substances with the property of activating the body's own endogenous antioxidant defense pathways. In other words, these compounds do not act directly as antioxidants. They train the body to produce and use its own cellular protection mechanisms more effectively. For a tissue as metabolically active and exposed to oxidative stress as the retina, this carries enormous relevance. Now let me tell you something that very few people know about what actually happens during the night while you sleep. The brain has a cleaning system that functions primarily during deep sleep. This system is called the glymphatic system, and it removes metabolic waste accumulated during the day. The optic nerve is directly connected to the central nervous system and shares some aspects of this cleaning system. When sleep quality is poor, this cleaning process is interrupted. Waste accumulates. And over time, that accumulation affects signal transmission in the optic nerve before any apparent retinal damage even shows up. This means sleep health is not merely indirectly important for vision. It is part of the active maintenance mechanism of the visual system. And what you consume in the hours before sleep directly affects the quality of that nightly process. This is why the question about these foods is not only what to consume, but when. A dietary pattern that includes these compounds consistently, especially throughout the day and not just occasionally, provides ongoing support to the restoration process that happens at night. A lot of people reach this point and ask, but what about genetics? Is it not genetics that determines whether you will lose your vision or not? The answer is more complex than a simple yes or no. Genetics defines a kind of predisposition, a threshold of vulnerability. But the expression of those genetic vulnerabilities is largely modulated by environment, lifestyle, nutrition, and the body's inflammatory state. There is a field of biology called epigenetics that studies exactly this, how external factors influence which genes are activated or silenced throughout life. People with a genetic predisposition to macular degeneration, for example, do not necessarily develop the condition, and people without that predisposition can develop serious visual problems as a result of a compromised general state of health. Genetics is one part of the equation, not the entire equation. What long-term data consistently shows is that nutritional status is one of the modifiable factors with the greatest impact on ocular health across a lifetime. It is not the only factor, but it is one of those that responds most to deliberate action. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Write in the comments which state or city you are watching this video from. I read the comments personally, and when I see where people are coming from, I get a much better sense of what reality of health each region is actually facing. You can just write the state, you can write the city, whatever feels right. There is one aspect of ocular health that almost never comes up in these conversations: the relationship between gut health and visual function. This might sound unlikely at first, but there is a direct communication pathway between the gut and the central nervous system called the gut-brain axis, and the optic nerve is part of that system. The state of the gut microbiome influences the level of systemic inflammation in the body, and systemic inflammation is one of the main drivers of progressive damage to ocular tissue over the years. When the gut microbiome is out of balance, the body enters a state of low-grade inflammation that is almost imperceptible day to day, but that silently erodes sensitive tissues over time. The retina, being a highly specialized tissue with limited regenerative capacity, is especially vulnerable to this kind of accumulated chronic damage. The foods I mentioned throughout this video, beyond their specific compounds for ocular health, also have properties that support intestinal balance. The glucosinolates in kale have prebiotic activity. The fatty acids in salmon reduce systemic inflammatory markers. The anthocyanins in blueberry modulate the composition of the microbiome. This means that when you take care of gut health, you are indirectly taking care of eye health. And when you neglect the gut, even if the diet seems reasonable in other areas, the visual system ends up paying a price that will only show up years later. Getting close to the end of this video, I want to leave you with something I consider fundamental. Most people only think about taking care of their vision when there is already a problem. When the doctor prescribes the first pair of glasses, when they start struggling to read up close or far away, when night vision begins to fail. At that point, the damage is already established and the conversation shifts from prevention to management. What I learned over many decades is that the most effective care is the kind that happens before the problem appears. Not out of paranoia, not out of obsession with health, but from understanding that the body responds cumulatively. Every meal that delivers the right nutrients is a deposit of health. Every night of sleep, well supported by the brain's cleaning system, is a night of active maintenance of the visual system. At 91, I look back and cannot identify any single dramatic decision that explains my health today. What I can see is a pattern of small, consistent choices made over decades. Not perfect, not extreme, but consistent. The most powerful window of opportunity to preserve ocular health is the one that is open right now. Whether you are young, middle-aged, or already in a more advanced stage of life, ocular tissue responds to nutritional care at any stage, though results vary depending on the current state of health and how far along the process is. If this content reached you today, it was not by accident. There is something in what was said here that resonates with something you were already searching for, or with something you already sensed but did not know how to name. Do me a favor, write in the comments where you are watching this video from, and also tell me whether you have already had some issue with eye health, or whether you are here precisely to prevent that from happening. I want to understand the journey of the people who are here, because this channel only makes sense if what I share is actually reaching the people who genuinely need it. If you found this video useful, share it with someone you know who is struggling with their vision. Not because this is a magic solution, but because well-grounded information is the first step toward any real change in health. And if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the right time to do that. Because what was said here today is only a fraction of what is still to come about health, longevity, and what truly keeps the body functioning well for a very long time.